Boukas. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Scotty. How you doing?
I'm doing good. I can't believe I had audio issues the first time we did this. I can't believe it.
You know, when you're dealing with a Greek American musician that specializes in Brazilian music, you got to account for those things.
Yeah, for everyone who's watching in the replay, I'm going to cut it out, but there was a solid, we had about 30, only like 30 seconds of conversation before I realized what happened, but we were having an issue with my mic. So everything should be coming through now. Boukas, how you doing good today? Where are you coming to us from?
From Kew Gardens, Queens.
Nice.
Is next to Forest Hills. You know, as the crow flies, it's about 10 miles to Midtown, something like that.
You know, I said this just before, but I wanted to thank you for coming on because you're officially the last episode of 2020. This is the Christmas episode. Unless any, for some reason, last minute guests happen, you will be the last of the year. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm honored to be part of this this venture that you have, which I think is really fills a great place in your creative portfolio, so to speak, because I mean you're great with, I mean, aside from being an amazing musician, you know, I mean, and technology, very savvy. I mean, you're really great with people in terms of your communication skills, and there's no reason why you should not, you know, leverage that as part of your, excuse the expression, brand, because, you know, there's lots of musicians that play really well but don't know how to talk to people in the arts, people. And you just have a real uncanny facility with that, and that's a really great thing.
I mean, fortunately, when I was a kid, I had a lot of chances to hang out with like older musicians. So I found that, you know, musicians, no matter where you go, kind of have a similar vibe. Do you know what I mean? Do you feel that way?
Well, I think some of it can be stylistically, you know, pegged to one degree or another. I mean, I think jazz musicians or people who are improvisers at heart, I think that they have a better time kind of going with the flow and being a little more relaxed about communicating. I'm not going to like cite particular styles of music where I think people are not facile, because I would hate to broadly paint anything. But it's my experience that you know, and obviously Brazilian musicians are like, I mean, they're hugging you before you even meet them. So, so obviously their social skills are it's culturally embedded in their DNA. So, yeah. So, I mean, I think musicians that you know, really value their creativity and are able to improvise not only on their instruments but also in a fairly open forum like the one that you have here on your podcast. I think it's a fairly natural thing.
Yeah, and I found that, I mean, I grew up in central New York, which is, I would say, in terms of the actual attitude of musicians, like their kind of personality, very similar to the city. I mean, you know, people, there's a definite difference in terms of the type of music and how they play, but in terms of the actual attitude, and I think that's helped with a lot of the people that I've talked to on this show are New York based and sort of have that kind of a little bit of sarcasm and, you know, that kind of like musician attitude, which I think has been good for being able to talk to people, because I grew up with that.
I mean, you're from Utica, and I mean, for those people who don't know, like upper central New York State, you know, those kinds of towns are really like industrial, hardworking people, blue collar. So it's not that far from being like from the Bronx or from Queens or Brooklyn. I mean, but
if you go and check out places like Brooklyn, or if you go from like Brooklyn to Utica, in terms of architecture and the actual, like when they were at their heyday, we're similar cities, you know, they had similar vibes in terms of like how they were built. So like, especially coming from, I come from Brooklyn, and then I go to Penn Station. I take it straight on a train to, I can't even remember what, I think they call it Union Station or something in Utica, and very similar, like terms of the actual aesthetic of the city. I mean, Utica's very quiet. That's a different, in terms of the social aspect of it, it's a lot different. But the actual buildings and construction are similar to Brooklyn. I mean, that's a whole part of New York State, going up that whole Hudson line. Have you ever taken an Amtrak right up the east side of the Hudson River?
way up. Yeah, yeah,
You can see all those
absolutely.
beautiful old buildings, especially like you see those islands with the houses on them. You ever see
Yep.
those?
Yep, I have. Yeah, it's been a while, but yeah, absolutely. So, what are we going to talk about?
Okay, let me ask you. I have a bunch of stuff I want to talk to you about because Boukas,
Great.
I've known you for a few years, but I've only you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think I've only gotten the your career and your life from a certain point on, and I haven't really had a chance to go back and ask you a bunch of things about your early life, and so I don't know a lot of stuff about how you were before you were mainly a musician. So, first thing I want to know initially is where are you from originally?
Well, I was born in Washington Heights, and then when I got to be school age, kindergarten, my family and I we moved to Astoria, Queens, and I grew up in Astoria, which even back then was a huge melting pot, kind of life there. Walk up sixth floor, walk up tenement buildings, and lots of schoolyards and people of all genders, races. I mean, I basically lived in the street, playing sports like day and night.
Hmm.
It was just that kind of vibe, very, very city, but also very multi-ethnic. And I'm really happy that I grew up in those kinds of surroundings rather than a suburban surrounding where suddenly you're thrust in college into like the real world,
Hmm.
at least culturally and ethnically. Yeah,
So were you living in a house or in an apartment when you were a kid?
it was an apartment building, walk up apartment building. You
Gotcha.
know,
Okay. And when was it that you first got into playing music?
well, I mean, I'm a child of the '60s, so everyone when they were like 14 owned a guitar of some sort. And wanted to be like the Beatles or Bob Dylan. So, I happen to have the great fortune of having an older sister, Janine, who she's about 5 years my senior, and she basically brought me down to Greenwich Village to see James Taylor when he was a nobody, Richie Havens, Tim Hardin, Hendrix. I mean, I got to see people before they were anyone rehearsing on a Saturday afternoon and sitting there all afternoon watching them rehearse their music. So I owe a lot to my sister for, basically trial by fire, just throwing me into that situation. And then, of course, culturally, I mean, rock music was huge, R&B was huge, Motown was huge. There was so much great music out there that to not want to pick up some kind of instrument and play or sing or some combination of both in my case. And so, yeah, I mean, so I played guitar initially, like a little bit of rock stuff, but then I got more attracted to kind of the folk rock acoustic thing, more kind of in the direction of like Tim Buckley, Crosby, Stills and Nash. Lots of vocal harmonies. I was my ear I think developed very early when I was very very young because my father would bring home symphonic and opera records and play them, and I would just sit there and just soak it all in. And I have this image of myself. It's as clear as it was when I was doing it. I would be like on the floor, and that little saddle that's between rooms, and it's grainy wood. Well, I
Hmm.
put my big toe on the right edge of that, and I would slowly move my toe across as if it was the grooves of the records, and then, without singing, without doing anything, I would hear the exact recording in my head from beginning to end, a complete Beethoven symphony, a complete movement of an opera, Bach cantata, whatever it is, passively as if I had an iPod in my head. And so I know that from an early age, I kind of had the equivalent of photographic memory and sound. So I could just passively listen in full detail what my father was turning me on to.
And how old were you when you discovered that?
I just kind of knew it intuitively when I was like, 2.5, 3. And so I mean we can get into the whole discussion about, oh, he has perfect pitch, he's one of those, but all I know is that I was able to recall without effort without having to try, I was able to just passively recall pieces of music that really affected me in a very profound way. And when you're that young, you don't know theory. And as a matter of fact, I entered college not knowing theory, not knowing how to read music and all that. So, yeah, I mean, I think that musically was something that made it made sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was obviously lots of lyricism and passion and just sonic beauty, but the organization of the sounds into melodies and harmonies and counterpoints and whatever I ended up calling them once I knew what they were, it had a certain logic to it that I think really appealed to me.
Mm-hmm.
Just the sonic organization of a piece and the identity of a certain composer. I knew that when I put like, a Chopin nocturne on, it was like, I know I was going to be emotionally affected in a certain way that, for example, Bach or Mozart or Verdi or Puccini would not be able to affect me. It was almost like each composer's style or each era, had because it had its own idiosyncratic vocabulary. It just affected me emotionally in a different way, and I think it's that when you're that young, it imprints you the emotional reaction that the music elicits from you. That's what you take with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, if you decide to be a musician and study and really be serious about it, you start to give names to things which were really only part of your real, like central nervous system, like really deeply embedded stuff,
And when did the guitar become your central focus for music?
Well, I mean, I used it mainly as an accompaniment instrument, when I was, I did a little bit of rock bands. And then, like a lot of people, they were trading in their solid body guitars for acoustics. So I traded mine in 1969 when I was about 16, and I traded mine in for a nice Guild acoustic, and I started writing, contemporary folk type songs, acoustic songs, but the harmonies were weird. I was tuning the guitar all kinds of crazy ways to get things. And again, no formal training, no notation, but writing just came very, very easily to me.
Would you credit Would you credit that early composition style of the folk music? Would you say that's a direct reaction to the '60s folk scene from the Village?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you see people like in the act of working on their music, and the whole idea of being a lyricist and a songwriter, where you write both the lyrics and the music.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just a really natural thing for me. And so I had a couple of folk duos and trios, and we got to be really quite polished, and then people went off to college, and that was it. And so my friends went off to Oswego, which is way north of you, and I stayed in New York, went to NYU, and was starting to get interested in jazz in my late teens.
What was your major at NYU?
Well, it changed a bunch of times. I mean, I went in initially as a journalism major, and after having a couple of the professors in that department, I said, man, these guys are really boring. I can't take it. So I became a psychology major, and this was all in the space of a couple of semesters, and I was digging that. But then the pull of like saying, man, you should really get your musical chops together as far as theory and analysis and and all the notational skills, transcribing, because I knew I had the ear for it, but I had not quite connected it up with the nomenclature of what you call things. And once I learned what to call certain sounds, and once I learned how that is represented on paper, I mean, within a matter of like a month, I was transcribing Wes Montgomery solos.
And what was it initially that made you decide? I just said initially. Initially, that made you decide to go into college for journalism. Was your family in that industry?
No. I mean, I like to write. I mean, I always, in terms of writing prose, not so much fiction, but like I enjoyed writing term papers on subjects that mattered to me, whether it was back in the day, you know, whatever social justice issues were back then, which haven't, you know, surprisingly changed very much in the last 50 years. Um, but I kind of I dug the use of vocabulary and being able to basically concretize a thought in an elegant way through language, and I think that was the seed of what then became later in I mean already, I mean I was speaking French fluently from having an amazing teacher in high school, and then, you know, eventually once I got into Brazilian music in my mid 20s, then I was studying Portuguese. And if you live in New York City, you speak kind of street Spanish, just basically so you can buy at the bodega what you need. So, and being a choral singer as well at the same time, I was, you know, kind of cutting my teeth on being a choral singer, whether it was church jobs or being part of a choir that would do a number of concerts. And so,
Was
you
this
know,
during college?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
and after, yeah. I mean, I was a legit choral singer, you know, for decades, and then I became more of a studio singer, you know, producing jingles and stuff in the '80s and '90s. Yeah, but the use of my voice in a lot of different contexts was also quite a natural thing, and but the choral music part of things is quite deep, and I encourage anybody who's an instrumentalist that thinks that they have an agile ear and a kind of like diamond in the rough, yet to be cultivated voice. I really encourage you to sing choral music because it's the best ear training in the world. You're a better musician. You learn how to follow a conductor. You learn how to sing in several languages if you're lucky, and and just the feeling of singing with people is the same as having like a great concert or a jam session in a jazz situation. The only thing is the music's notated and you're interpreting it, but just to make the music just fly off the page and sound great is a thrill, really is a thrill. And then if you put the spiritual and faith part on top of it, and you're singing in an Episcopal church, which does like Gregorian chant, you know, motet, full mass, you know, sung polyphonically every week. I mean, I was subbing on different churches and singing some of the greatest polyphony written between, like, you know, the beginning of the 15th century all the way up to contemporary.
Well, what inspired you to start doing choir work specifically?
Well, actually, it was kind of a default situation because at NYU, I was in a program which was more theory and composition based as opposed to performance based. At NYU only offered that program and the music education program, which I had no interest in. And so you had to be either in the orchestra or the choir to fulfill some kind of performance thing for each semester. And obviously the guitar, you know, is not a traditional orchestral instrument. So by default, you know, I signed up for the choir, and that was the beginning of it. You know, being, you know, standing next to an amazing musician who was a pianist, a violist, and a great baritone singer who read just anything written on the page. And I just basically went under his wing for a year and learned the ropes with him and other singers that just really had it together. And graduate students, I mean, within the first year, I was already singing in graduate student ensembles that were focused on early music. Yeah.
And were you studying music in general with people outside of your college, with you know, other instructors?
No, no. The idea of private study wasn't something. I mean, I'm self-taught. I mean, I'm self-taught as far as a player and a singer, and being that, you know, I'm good at copying and mimicking different styles and sounds and vocal sounds, and you know, I basically was able to play anything I heard, even if I yet did not know what to call it. So I mean, I think it was just a fairly natural thing for.
What point was it that you felt that natural ability to hear something and your logical ability to name what it is? Where do you think that point was in your life when they matched up and you were equal or as close to equal as possible in terms of hearing something well and then actually knowing how to notate it or describe it?
Describe it, notate it, identify it verbally, sing it back, play it back, whatever. Yeah, it happened during my first year in college, and I started college a year early because I skipped a grade in high school, so or in actually middle school. So I was like 18, and I already knew. Actually, if I can recall, if I can indulge you for a second. So
Of course.
I'm in the listening room, which at that time was reel-to-reel tape recorders, right? Big reel-to-reel tape recorders, and I'm listening to the assignment for my 20th century music class. This was actually my first semester. It was my first semester, and we had like an 8 a.m. 20th century music class, and we were at that time, studying the music of Stravinsky. So guess what? Guess what the feature piece is? Right. So Rite of Spring, and there's a part where the trumpets go like where muted trumpets kind of go in contrary motion to each other. And I happen to have like a couple of pieces of music paper, and I just kind of scribbled it down. I said, wow, that's really cool. I gotta try that on the guitar. And then one of my classmates was like kind of walking around and looking over my shoulder, and he looked at what I wrote and he said, oh, those are the muted trumpets in Rite of Spring. I see you're listening to Rite of Spring. He said, those are the right notes. Like, not only the right notes, but in the right key. Do you know that? I said, huh? Like, I didn't know that I wrote the notes correctly in the right key. And he said, you have perfect pitch. And I went, oh my God. So it wasn't until then that someone actually identified that what I had experienced as, well, of course, that's what it is. I mean, that's how I found out I had perfect pitch. And
all through this time, like especially like right after you get out of college, is music your main source of income at that time?
It was starting to be, yeah. I mean, I started doing like society gigs, wearing a tuxedo, society gigs, wedding gigs, bar mitzvah gigs, bad buffet food. I was starting to hook that stuff up. And then, eventually, once I got out of college, I mean, I had a very, very important decision to make because I was on full scholarship, not only because I had good grades and stuff, but, we were pretty poor. And so, affording, NYU tuition was like out of the question. So I did really well in NYU scholastically, academically, and so forth. And then I was offered a graduate teaching assistantship, which would be full tuition and having to teach maybe a section of ear training or sight singing or something like that. But by that time, by the time I was like getting to be 21, I was already gigging so much out of town that I didn't think that I would be able to be in town to make all my classes. And at that point I was already living on my own. So I had to turn it down.
Really?
And they were furious. They said, I can't believe you're turning this. I said, listen, I have to make a living, I mean, nobody's paying my rent, nobody's buying my food. It's like, and further down the line, I got my BA in 1974. It wasn't until 2010, 36 years later, that I decided to go for my master's in composition at Queens College, and it was the best thing I could have ever done. And I'm glad I waited the 36 years because that's when I was really ready to do it.
Okay. And when was it that all the Brazilian music? Because I know that's mainly what I know you for. Is I know you less for your singing and more for Brazilian influences and all of that. So at what point does that come in and become such a prominent figure in your career?
Well, I mean, it's just something that just flowers inside you, And the thing is, one of the other areas of gigs that I was playing, and in this case it wasn't guitar, but it was baby bass, the Ampeg electric upright. I was playing in salsa bands and cumbia bands, Colombian cumbia bands. In Jersey, in the Bronx, storefront places. And so I was really, really involved with Afro-Cuban music in the heyday of salsa, in the mid 70s. I mean, that's when there was so many great bands, so many great dance clubs. I mean, just places where you could work. And one of my roommates at the time was a great percussionist, originally from Puerto Rico. And he happened to go to Brazil on tour with an American artist and came back with a stack of records from Brazil. And in those days, in like the mid 70s, you couldn't get those records. There was no distributor that would even take a risk to physically distribute Brazilian contemporary music, you know, pop music.
Mm-hmm.
And he brought these records home, man, and I just said, "Uh-oh. You know what? It's like being like a great bebop player. I consider that to be a passage that any improvising musician interested in jazz-oriented music needs to go through." I mean, basically, Bird and Coltrane are like the Bach of classical music. You have to go through those vocabularies in order to be prepared to I think be a complete musician. And so by the time I heard Brazilian music, I mean, I just said, wow, this is not only is the harmony amazing, not only are the melodies like just gorgeous but the rhythm sections were just grooving in a way that like no other music grooved. And the rhythmic complexity of the music on a single instrument basis and then synergized, it was just so lush and attractive. And the production on some of these pop recordings was like, oh, you need 4 alto flutes for 5 bars? Okay, we'll get 4 alto flutes. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like there was like the budgets on these things were like, you know, whatever you hear, you hire them.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
they just wanted to get it done. It was no problem about the budget.
I mean, no, I mean, you have a great arranger and they just hire the people. So anyway, so I started composing. I mean, I was already composing like very, very like Wayne Shorter, Joe Henderson centric type tunes, you know, that I was, you know, playing jazz gigs with and tons of jam sessions. I mean, I must have been doing three jam sessions a day, just in my own house that I was sharing with 3 other guys. And there were times when you know, the bass player left, so I had to play bass, so I pick up my Fender, and then sometimes the drummer was late, so I just pick up my sticks on my kit and play drums. Mm-hmm. And so like that was my jazz education. That and like listening really critically to music. You know, and transcribing, studying, really going deep in. And I'm not just talking about like transcribing melodic solos. I was transcribing entire rhythm sections, including drums and bass, like the comping of you know, Herbie and Miles and Tony Williams under George Coleman. And I'd have George Coleman's solo, which I had already done, and then in full open score, the entire rhythm section.
That must.
And Minas Gerais. Mm-hmm. But it was a slow evolution. And you know, so I would say from like 76 all the way up until now, I've just been into the music and just going deeper and deeper and wider. And compositionally, I would say the 2 main directions that have, you know, revealed themselves to be the most potent and prolific are Brazilian music through the lens of contemporary chamber music, which would be more through composed stuff where there's less improvisation and more through composed music, but it's still based in a rural or an urban genre that could be played in a more popular way. They are popular genres. And then Brazilian jazz. And so, you know, I just created you know, bonds with different musicians and wrote for them, and if I was in the ensemble, great. Sometimes I wrote for string quartet and I'd give the music to them and they would play it and record it. So yeah. I mean,
so when you're composing at this time, sorry, we're gonna say something. I can hear that like the New York City internet is really starting to. The delay is getting further and further. You noticing that?
No, I'm okay here.
Okay, I'm having. So every once in a while, I notice that I'll say something and there's a little bit of a delay. I apologize to everyone listening. We're having a massive nor'easter storm right here, and in a matter of 20 minutes, it basically got pitch black an hour and a half before it usually gets pitch black outside. So if we have some complications, I apologize for that. But So Boukas, I wanted to ask, like, when you compose a Brazilian piece of music, first of all, do you usually have a concept before you start composing? And also, are you ever thinking about, are you ever concerned that if you compose something through the lens of another type of music, that maybe people who are more strict about the specifics of Brazilian music might be like, well, this isn't really Brazilian music because it's through this lens of something else. Are you ever, is that any part of your brain while you're composing, or are you just trying to put in what you think sounds the best?
Okay, so let me unpack that because there's a few questions in there which I think are all very, very important ones. And for those people who are out there who are composers and interested in compositional process, I'm more than willing to just spill my gray matter on a plate and give it to you.
Do it.
Yeah, so I mean, in genres that were so attractive, aside from what I've already cited, which is like the absolute amazing rhythmic aspect, and very sophisticated, harmonic, vocabulary, which would include like the Impressionists, Debussy, Ravel, and then just the melody, and then the Portuguese language, the sung language of Portuguese. It's like it's the most beautiful language to sing in or to write for. I'm not a lyricist, in Portuguese. I don't have those language and poetic skills. I mean, I'm fluent, but as a speaker, and I sing, fluently. But going back to what you were saying, like is it derivative? Is it authentic? Like the word, like this is not really authentic. And the typical thing that a jazz musician would do, and I'm sure you've seen this, where like, the drummer and bass player learn a 2-bar pattern. Right? You learn that, and then you write like a bebop melody on top of it, and say, "Oh, it's a bossa nova. That's a sound of." Nah. That's not to say that there can't be jazz influence, because jazz has been part of contemporary Brazilian music since the 1920s. So as well as classical, contemporary classical music. So when I say through the lens of jazz or through the lens of contemporary classical music, the thing about Brazilian music in and of itself is that it's very plastic and fluid. There are no rules, In other words, the language of jazz was codified, so soon. And then with the advent of jazz education became all the more codified, like this is the right way to play, which basically puts chains around people's hands. In Brazilian music, I found that was my way out of being a bebop jazz player playing swing.
Because you were able to experiment more.
I was really done with that. I needed a whole new landscape to work with. So if I talk about, let's say, 2 very specific projects that I've been involved with for quite a while. The first is Dialigos Duo with the great French clarinetist Louis Arquez, and we've been together for 4 years. And he plays clarinet and bass clarinet, and I'm playing guitar. There's no vocals in that. And over these 4 years, I've composed the largest body of clarinet, guitar, contemporary Brazilian music in the world.
It's amazing.
There's 7 suites, 67 movements of music, and I'm working on the 8th suite right now. When you have a great player, you have to write for them. That's a gift from God. And if you don't take advantage of the situation and write your butt off, then you're really missing the boat. So in terms of that situation, I can go back to that as far as how I deal with compositional process with that. But to go into the Brazilian jazz direction, I play with the Quarteto Moderno, which is, myself playing and singing, Lucas Pino on woodwinds, who's just like an absolute genius, an amazing player, Mauricio Zotarelli on drums, and Gustavo Amaranchi on bass. And so I was basically writing like Brazilian jazz tunes with blowing, So we would have solos, but the compositions themselves were pretty beefy, and the harmonic language was you know, I would have to say quite, sophisticated and challenging to blow on. So, and that's one of the things about when you're writing any music that has an improvisational basis upon the harmonic structure of the original composition, it's a great way of kicking your own ass. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, no, exactly what you mean.
Let me write what I'm hearing, and then when it's my turn to blow, like my tail's going to be between my legs. I mean, it's a great it's a great thing to be able to kick your own butt. So we released a live CD, Dialigos Duo. We just released our second CD, Shoro Tributes, which is all short. And I say, okay, I'll have another piece next week. And so the first two suites, which is Dialigos for clarinet and guitar, and Dialigos for bass clarinet and guitar, when I got to the number 7, I said, 7, that's a good number of pieces for a suite, so we'll call it that. But from that point on, all the suites have had a governing principle, whether it be a specific region of Brazil, let's say the northeast of Brazil, whether it be a specific genre, or let's say a portfolio of genres as in Choro. So our second CD is Choro Tributes, and as is the case with every movement of music that I've written for this duo, Dialigos Duo, it's a dedication to a great Brazilian musician or composer, which means that again,
when did that CD come out?
I'm kind of it. Well, I mean, we had the CDs ready to go when COVID first hit in March, so we've been kind of softly releasing it since then. And obviously, gigs are hard to get right now, and so we have to be creative about releasing it. And I created Playalongs. I created Playalongs with hard left-right panning, with click count-offs, so that guitar players and clarinet players and flute players can cut their teeth on some really difficult music that we recorded. So that had so before I wrote the first piece, I made a list of the people I wanted to honor, and I knew that these were going to be called Choro Tributes, or a dozen. I thought of a dozen is a good number. So I started with the really early roots of Choro, Ernesto Nazaré, Anacleto de Medeiros, and then Pixinguinha, and went all the way to Hermeto Pascoal and Genga, who are the only two living composers in that suite. And then from that point forward, then I wrote the suite Impressions of Minas, which is all the music from Minas Gerais, Toninho Horta, Sérgio Santos, very, very beautiful, amazing styles of music, very specific to that state of Minas Gerais. And then the last biggest suite, the 7th one that I finished, is Cantos do Nordeste, which is songs of the Northeast. And Northeast Brazil consists of about 10 states, and the genres are just so plentiful. So I ended up writing an 18 movement suite, which is like an hour and 25 minutes of solid music without breaks. So
oh geez,
that's the last suite that I wrote. Like, I thought I was done at 15, and then I said, oh man, you left out this person and you left out that person. And
it totaled up to what, 18?
Yeah, to 18 movements. Yeah, that's what brought us to 67 movements of music in 4 years. And so what I basically did with that was I started with a sheet of legal paper, and I wrote down the people I wanted to honor. And then I started thinking, well, let's see, what genre would be really cool to write in for this particular person? And so I started to match up genres with the people I was writing tributes to, and I would just take a walk in the woods, and then knowing that I was it was like I was ready for this particular person, to write something. Then the sounds were just coming out of my ears, and I had to just run home and start writing. And that's what kept on going. I would go into the woods knowing that it was either one person or the other whose tribute was like up and ready to be done. And thanks to the universe, God, whoever you want to attribute it to, they were very generous. And so I was able to write. And again, this is a situation where you are channeling their vocabulary through your own creative lens. So the idea is not to plagiarize or to cop somebody's stuff, but the challenge for me is for people to still recognize that I'm the composer, but it's clearly got the influence and of the person that I'm honoring.
Does that take a lot of revisions to get a song to fit that criteria? Are you going back a lot and changing things, saying like this sounds too much like me, or too much like them, or not enough, or not enough? Do you ever? Are you doing a lot of revisions?
No, actually, the Shoro, the dozen Shoros suite, which is on the CD Shoro tributes, and you can flash my homepage and Dialigos Duo page.
Oh yeah, so everyone who's watching, just so you know, in the links, if you're listening on the Apple Podcast, if you go to the YouTube channel, go to this video, this live stream, there will be in the description links to Boukas' website for the duo, for his residencies. Everything you need to see will be down in the description, right at the top of the description. So go check that out if you're interested. Anyway, keep going, Boukas.
Thanks. Yeah. So I wrote in this particular case. So the short answer to your question is that I'm never doubting myself, saying, "Oh, gee, that's too close of a cop." Mm-hmm. No, it's like you can't. Now ideas have come into my head before I've written them to say, "Oh, that's really close," but you're getting it. It's in you. It's coming out. But in terms of revisions, I would say that the guitar accompaniment for these dozen Shoros is so complex that it underwent about 15 months of revisions through the rehearsal process, and then like a month after I finally arrived at the final accompaniments, then we recorded it. But the dozen Shoros were written in sketch in 10 days.
Really?
Yeah, I had 10 days before I was going to have double surgery on my bicep tendon and a full rotator cuff tear. And obviously I was going to be in a sling for 8 weeks. So who's picking up a guitar? Who's going to be writing? So I had this quite palpable, time frame of like, you've got 10 days to write this suite. So like, get to work, man. Mm-hmm. And sometimes having a time frame like that can be a good focus mechanism, So basically revisions, if there are any, will come out of the rehearsal process. But the thing is, there are so many suites, like 4, that we haven't even read through yet. It's a good problem to have. It's good to have more music than you've already had a chance to play or record. I'd rather have more like in the hopper than like, oh man, I'm really dry compositionally. I got to write some. Yeah. So in terms of revisions, and there are some revisions to the clarinet part where Louis will show me a couple of technical things and I say, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. Let's modify that.
And you've said that, the CD came out right as the pandemic is hitting. So that put a huge damper on the actual recording.
Yeah, I was in Denver on spring break and Santa Fe on spring break visiting colleagues of mine and friends of mine. And I'm on the phone with the art director Louis and I were trying to wrap up like the fine tunings of the CD art, front and back cover. So it was mixed and mastered like the day before I left town. Mm-hmm. And then when I came back to New York on March 21st, it was like, oh boy, this is going to be pretty serious. So so the CD basically, it's ready, it's there, like I say, we're rolling out not only the download but Playalongs so that musicians can really get some benefit out of working on the music beyond listening to it and say, hey man, that's some cool music. I mean,
are the Playalongs out yet?
Oh yeah, they're available. It's a zip file. Zip file with the pan Playalongs with count-offs, the complete scores and parts, composer commentary, and then a user guide to tell people how to manipulate. So if you've got like amazing slowdowner, to do A/B looping, changing the key, changing the tempo, changing the balance, whatever you want to do. And I basically give people like templates for how to work on stuff, not only technically in terms of how to work with whichever playback app they use, but also how to practice, like how to take a section section at a time and really slowly build it up, build the tempo up and stuff. So that's all a zip file. It's $25, and I think it's a good deal. You know, and at times like this, when people are looking for challenging music, and I think Choro as a genre is some of the most challenging music because it's this beautiful blend of Afro-Brazilian influences and classical influences. And jazz influences. So anyone who's coming from a jazz background or a classical music background, they'll resonate with the history of Choro, which arguably started in the 1860s, 1870s, up through today.
And how are you guys adapting now that the fact that the CD gets interrupted by the pandemic? How are you guys adapting to the fact that, you know, the New York City gigging scene is in the shitter right now? What are you guys doing to keep that live music aspect going during, until we get this vaccine?
Yeah. Well, the short answer to that question is that Louis was out of town almost all this time. He was like really out of town. Like at some point he was in Alaska for 3 months and out in the wilderness, really digging it. And so I had a couple of virtual concerts which happened recently. And one of them was at a library where we've performed before, and they actually were nice enough to say, "Hey, would you be willing to do a virtual concert?" So he was down here, and we hadn't seen each other in 9 months, and I realized, oh man, I miss this cat so much, not just musically, but personally. You know, he's like my younger brother, you know, and he's the voice of the music that I'm writing. So I owe him so much. And so we did our first virtual concert like in my house. And real low tech with his iPad, and it came out just fine. And tomorrow night I'm going to be doing and we were supposed to do a gig at Jazz Forum, the great jazz club in Tarrytown that Mark Morganelli runs, and we were supposed to do a duo set tomorrow night. And with the storm and with him being in Massachusetts, I'm doing it solo. So tomorrow. How
are you going to adapt the music for it being just guitar? Are you playing different songs completely?
I'm going to be playing mostly covers, because I've played lots of solo gigs in restaurants and lots of solo concerts where the majority of what I'm doing is either very guitar centric, like going through the whole litany of Brazilian guitar history and playing their compositions, or singing and playing like great Brazilian popular tunes that have lasted the test of time. So I'm really comfortable and used to playing solo. I mean, I'm going to miss Louis, but we'll be looking for more virtual concerts.
Do you have any idea the next time you're going to be able to get together with him again and really start playing the music?
Well, I think there's a number of factors involved, most of which are beyond like your control and my control. Both of us have been extremely, pretty much quarantined and have only seen our significant others and just gone to the supermarket to buy food. Mm-hmm. So I was comfortable with him being here rehearsing for 4 days and then doing the concert. But I don't really know. I mean, our goal, besides the concert thing, we're in the process of booking virtual educational residencies using our repertoire as the curriculum. Mm-hmm. And the original model, which we put together a couple of years ago when we played at the International Clarinet Association convention, I put together a brochure of on-site residencies, which would consist of master classes and lectures and concerts and the whole thing. But then when COVID hit, I adapted the brochure to a virtual environment. And then when things get to be safe again, there's a hybrid form of the residency where if we give the music to the professors, let's say the clarinet professor and the guitar professor have like 8 people each, give them the music, give them the audio, what have you, give them the play along files, and then basically stage out over the course of the semester virtual master classes, just work with the guitar players, and then start working with the duos. And so the teachers would form duos that they think would be compatible, and then we would critique them. And then by the time you get to the end, then that's when we would show up. The students would do their concert. We would do a concert of music that is not the music that they're playing, because we've already moved on to the next suite. And so the idea of a hybrid residency that culminates with a physical visit of the duo, I think, is a very viable model. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I want to ask you something else, because we've had a little bit of time to talk about this privately, but I want to ask about, because I know during your career you were involved in subbing on Broadway a lot, and I want to know how you got into that scene, because that's like a very coveted place. And I mean, I know a couple people from school who have gotten there and been able to get into that. But how do you, coming out of NYU, playing Brazilian and choral music, how do you get involved with that? And is there a specific contact that you had that kind of pushed you into it?
Yeah, well, I mean, there were guitar players who I knew that were like studio cats, and also they would play club dates. They would play like wedding gigs and stuff. I mean, it wasn't like they were working so much that they couldn't do those gigs too, but New York in those days, like in the late 70s, early 80s, was like socially between musicians, like a really happening place. People had lofts where you could just go. Like Lovano had a loft with Glenn Drew's great trumpet player, and they were constantly sessioning, just constant sessions. And so, but how I got into the Broadway thing was that there were like a handful of guitar players that I knew that happened to be doing shows, but they were already, few of them were already jazz players doing their jazz thing on the side. So I kind of got in that way. And then, once you prove yourself to be a good sub, especially you play a show, the guitar book for Les Mis is probably the hardest guitar book next to West Side Story that's ever been written for a Broadway show. And if you survive the 3 hours and 25 minutes of following a stick rubato, and you're playing 16th notes, and the string orchestra behind you is counting on you for the time, and the bass player is like reading the latest issue of Downbeat. You get through that with ice water in your veins, then basically word spreads fast that, man, Boukas nailed Les Mis, like, get him as a sub now. So that's when things kind of exploded in the sub scene. And also it was the same time I was starting to do jingle production. With not only with real rhythm sections, but that was the era of the very first sequencers from Roland, Lindrum 9000, samplers. I was using a Casio guitar synth to finger pick drum grooves. I mean, it was just so I was doing a lot of jingle production and production for like film and stuff, and there were some common people that would come through. So even though there were some people that only did one part of the scene, there were some people that kind of bled through. And actually, if you don't mind, I'd like to tell you a story.
Please do.
Which I think is a really, I think would be really good for young musicians who are wondering where their place should be in the music business. The basic motto of the story is if you're really good at more than one thing, and if somebody tries to label you and put you in a box and say you're this, you're not that, that's their problem, not your problem. So dig this. So I'm about to walk into the studio and do the lead vocal on the very first Coors Light jingle in 1988. I'm rolling out the product. They said, we need a fresh voice. And by that time I had done a lot of lead spots. I said, this guy doesn't sound like Springsteen. He doesn't sound like Bob Seger, and he can imitate Stevie Wonder and everybody like that. So, let's get him in here. And so when I did the demo, they said, okay, fine. So I'm going in to do the final, and the rhythm section is packing up. And the guitar player sees me, and we know each other, not well, but enough to know what we do. And he said, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm going to lay down the lead, for the spot. I wasn't making a big deal about it. Saying, I'm laying down the lead vocal for the spot. He says, you're a bebop guitar player. And I said, hey man, name. I said, and this is a very famous studio cat. I said, hey man, don't you ever tell me or anybody else who you think I am, because your limited mind is your problem, because I can do more than one thing well. That's your problem. That's your karma. Not
what does he say to you after that?
Oh, he was just like, he didn't know what to say, because I was like pointing at him at close range and ready to kick his ass.
Did you beat the shit out of him, Boukas?
No, but I sang the shit out of the vocal, and I mean, you probably know the vocal. I mean, it's the right beer at the right time. It's the silver bullet and it's tasting fine. It's a new way. So
that's you?
Oh, come on into Coors Light. It's the right beer now. Sorry for the distortion on the mic. Anyway, yeah. And
you're the Coors Light guy. I never knew that.
Well, the first campaign that rolled the beer.
Yeah. Wow.
So this is a long-winded way of advising young musicians. Don't ever let anyone try to limit your potential in diversifying yourself into another area of the music business. Don't ever be intimidated by people who close the door in your face. Like the great John Lewis says, get into good trouble. Well, you can kind of be a pain in the ass in a good way. Like just keep on staying in touch with people, and eventually maybe you'll get a chance. But, try not to think that I have to focus on doing one thing really, really well, or I won't have enough time to get to that level, and I'm not going to be able to make a living in the music business. Things have changed radically, as you know. I mean, everybody's producing their own tunes, like you're producing your own music, your pajamas with your laptop,
Yeah.
I mean, things have changed a lot, but my point is that diversification of what you do in the music industry is survival. And I would say at one point I had at least 15 or 20 different areas of the music business that I was involved with, not just clients, but I was writing instruction books. I was doing orchestrations and transcriptions for Yanni, and the big Parthenon concert that broke him on PBS. That's my work.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I worked with Yanni for over a dozen years. So anytime he got a CD coming out, he gave me the rough mixes. He says, "Okay, transcribe it." I transcribe it, orchestrate it, turn it around, and then the next thing you know, like the orchestra's on tour, making millions of dollars. So I mean, I had all of these different streams of income coming as a freelance person, doing different things. And eventually, as I started to get older, I'm 67 now, and as you start to get older, you start to age out of the scene. So I'm aged out of the Broadway scene. I mean, I was subbing on Chicago before COVID, but it's guys like who are in their 20s and early 30s. They're the guys that are playing the shows as far as guitar players go. So they have their own generation of people, and I get that. But yeah. And then as things dry up, I realized that my teaching at the New School was starting to comprise a larger percentage of my total income every year as other things were falling away.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And so when was it that you first started teaching on a university level?
1984 at William Patterson College in Wayne, New Jersey.
Okay.
I got a call to teach ear training. And I had never taught, formally in the university before. I had done workshops and lectures, places like Harvard and what have you, as an artist and educator. But the idea of teaching a course that was meeting twice a week and what have you, this was new to me, and so I started there, and then I got a call in '93 from Manus. Which at that time was not part excuse me, 1989. It wasn't yet part of the new school as it is now.
That was way uptown at that time, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was on 85th Street,
Gotcha.
and so they were starting a jazz program, and I was the first person they called to say, hey, we'd like you to teach a couple of things, and let's see how it goes.
Did
Well,
someone recommend you to them? Is that how they got your
yeah,
number?
yes, my good friend Stanley Dorn, who I went to NYU with, who was already teaching at Manus, he recommended me, and then it just exploded. It went from being like one class to six classes plus private students, and and then by 1994, the new school acquired Manus, and Manus continued to be a conservatory, but the two jazz programs merged. The new school program basically took the Manus jazz program and merged it. So I was one of the quote grandfathered faculty into the new school program, which had begun in '86, 3 years earlier. So since '95, I've been downtown at the new school.
When did they start? Because a big focus is your Brazilian music when you teach at the school. Do you come to them and say, hi, I specifically want to teach this Brazilian type, this certain ensemble, or do they know your history and come to you and say, this is what we want you to do?
Well, back in '95, I was teaching so many different things. I was teaching choral stuff. I was teaching guitar centric stuff. I was teaching vocal centric stuff. I was teaching theory, ear training, a lot of different things. I was teaching ethnomusicology. So when the then director Martin Mueller brought me downtown to have a face-to-face saying, listen, I really need you to teach this. And I said, okay, great. And that's where we started. And then at the end of the first semester, I pitched the idea of a Brazilian jazz ensemble, which first, got its first semester in spring '96. And then in 2006, I pitched the idea of a Brazilian choro ensemble, which would alternate with the Brazilian jazz ensemble one semester and another. And that's what I was doing up until about a year before COVID.
Well, Boukas, I mean, I had an incredible time in my Brazilian ensemble because I felt going into it, I was terrified because I knew nothing about the music. And I was just like, I was like, shit. Because I know whenever it comes to that kind of music, it's so specific. And I was just petrified that I was gonna mess it up because I grew up with so many jazz guys that I was coming from that mindset of like, if I do anything that's not traditionally correct, I'm gonna get chewed out. And so I appreciate you not trying to murder me the probably 1,000 times that I didn't play the drum groove correctly.
You played amazing. You did. I mean, the pieces for which there were recordings already that I transcribed from the original recordings. I mean, you just completely nailed it. It was like fantastic. And then the pieces that the great Jovino Santos Neto, who was pianist with Hermeto Pascoal for 25 years, he would give me Hermeto's latest pieces that Jovino had just put into finale. Like I was maybe one of 5 people in the world that got the latest stuff from Hermeto already in finale, and then I would do XML into Sibelius, and then I would do arrangements of these pieces that no one outside of Brazil had ever heard.
Really?
And that was kind of the idea. Like it was the idea of the Brazilian Jazz Ensemble was Hermeto Pascoal and his Árvore, his tree of composers that were either in his band at one time or still in his band. And no, you did a fantastic job. I mean, like anybody that needs a drummer, like hire this cat.
I don't think anyone needs a drummer at all right now.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, the thing that I really, really love about your playing, and also one of my longtime buddies, Raymar Chica, who I've tried to hook you up with, who's done like Broadway and studio work and stuff. There's a clarity and intent behind every single attack you play. There's no frilly stuff. There's no like stuff which gets in the way technically of the clarity of the idea. It's like when you decide that you want to have a certain kind of fill or go to a certain kind of groove or orchestrate a certain part of the kit, it is clear, and the bass player immediately whoosh, hooks up with you. The rhythm section is like happening, and it's really hard to play any style of music, whether it's traditional or contemporary jazz or Brazilian music or whatever, you know, because drums and guitar, I would, you know, I think they're very kind of chop-oriented instruments, or one's approach to it could be like, I need to have a certain amount of chops first before I can express myself on an artistic level that I think is viable. Whereas, you know, you and I know great drummers who did not practice like Joe Morello, you know, stuff. You know, it's they just played great. I mean, it wasn't about chops; it was about groove and taste, right?
Yeah, a lot of those studio guys. I mean, people like I just talked to Steve Percaro, and his brother Jeff was. I mean, he's in like the three big guys for me are Jeff, Steve Gadd, and Vinny Caliuta, and
Right.
those are guys. Now Caliuta and Caliuta is a huge practicing guy, and I'm not really sure about Steve, but I know Jeff. He just did it. Like he just was so natural with it, and it's amazing that there are people who can come from completely different backgrounds and states of mind, like Jeff, who is just so natural and just can just do it, and then guys like Vinny, who are they're also fantastic, but they come from a completely different mindset, and they're coming in from an analytic place, and yet they're both incredible. But guys like Jeff, like that natural, it has that, it makes you smile when you hear it, you know. And a lot of times I hear drummers and I listen to it and I'm like, it's kind of loud. I don't want to hear this.
You know, every music, if it's played in a way that is true to its original intention, every style of music has its own swing. Whether it's classical music, whether it's Afro-Cuban music, whether it's jazz, whether it's Brazilian music, you know, whether it's Bach, every style of music has its own kind of swing and flow and basket of articulations and dynamic subtleties, how to play phrases. You know, these are all things that get overlooked when people try and take a shortcut and just look at things in terms of acquiring vocabulary and just having the chops enough to play the vocabulary, and that's good enough. No, that gets you to the starting line where you see Usain Bolt like next to you, like going like that, you know. So the one thing that I highly recommend for any drummers and rhythm section players in general who are interested in Brazilian music, go on YouTube and check out the great rhythm section players and realize that they're not playing a 2-bar pattern ad infinitum. What they're doing is they're playing within a scope of vocabulary which for their instrument they personally, like an Italian suit, like a glove, they have adapted their own take on what the drum kit should do for a given genre. And one drummer in particular that everybody should check out is Kiko Freitas. His last name Reitas. Kiko Freitas. This guy, he's doing lots of great videos, and a lot of them are with his iPhone, where he's backstage and he just says, "Well, let me do a little quick video about this," and it's in Portuguese, but he breaks things down so fantastically clearly that, you know, so he's a guy that it's really a thinker. But then there are drummers that you know that just play, rhythm section players that just have the groove. They grew up with the music, you know, since they were kids. So yeah, I mean, it's like you asked before, like at what point are you derivative, or what point do you have your own voice and stuff? You know, as a drummer, you've got to be listening to the guys in the 60s and 70s that basically laid the foundation for the way guys are playing now. And also for rhythm section players, particularly pianists and guitar players, if you really want to get inside the rhythmic aspect of Brazilian music, then study and transcribe drummers and percussionists and adapt what they're doing to your instruments.
Absolutely.
And basically I take percussion instruments and drum kits and I reduce them down I'll do a whole full transcription and then whoosh, shrink it and then try and get it all happening in my right hand. So it's very humbling, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to put yourself in your own school. You got to determine what it is that you need.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes people are looking for someone else to give it to them. No, you got to find it, man. And now with YouTube, it's like there wasn't YouTube when I was in my early 20s or mid 20s. You couldn't even listen to a Brazilian recording.
Mm-hmm.
So now the availability of content is just so amazing that there's kind of no excuse.
Yeah.
But
well,
no, but the thing to know about, you know, Brazilian music mastery, as a player, composer, or both, is just like the trajectory of any other musical discipline. It's a long road, and fortunately, there's no end to the road, provided that you don't get complacent and think that you've nailed it, because that's the beginning of the end of growth. That's basically musical death. So, you know.
Well, Boukas, I mean, that's incredible advice for me and for everyone listening. But I just want to say, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for the years of education I had, and thank you so much for coming on today, because I really enjoy being able to talk to you in such a long form sense and really get to learn more about you.
I'm very humbled by this opportunity. I hope and if people want to email me, it's just richard@boukas.com, Boukas.com.
I'll throw that in the description as well after.
Yeah, or go to Boukas.com, my website. There's a lot of content there, whether it's you know, musical content, compositions, educational stuff. It's a big site, so get comfortable, get a nice drink in your hand, and feel free to, you know, shoot me an email with anything. There's lots of videos on YouTube, some of which are embedded in the site. And I just want to give a shout out to you, Scott, because, you know, you're doing something, particularly at a time like this, that is sorely needed, mm-hmm. which is for musicians to still feel that they're part of a community. And you are a beacon among a select few who realize that we need this. You know, our soul needs, we need to connect. We need to talk about the music. We need to talk about our, you know, our upbringing and stuff, because, you know, in this COVID world that we live in right now, it pretty much strips the walls down to the studs. And if you're not happy looking at the studs, like, you're in for a hard time. So
it's a good metaphor for it.
Yeah, and what I basically have done is I've looked at it as, well, I'm not teaching as much as I normally would, but I've got all this free time. So what are you going to do with it? Write music. And yeah. So I've tried to make lemonade out of the lemon, which is like, this is a tragedy. This is just absolutely one of the most difficult times for this world to be in. But my job is to create music regardless of what the state is, you know, in terms of, you know, global health, global economy, mm-hmm. all that stuff, social justice. I mean, my gig is like, if I don't take the opportunity to continue to create new music that is pushing the bar, then I don't deserve this life. You know, I should be like one of those nurses, like putting my life on the line every day with a ward full of COVID patients and see what that's like. So every day that I'm sitting here in my apartment, I need to really think about what my purpose is in life. And my purpose right now in life is to take this very, very difficult situation and turn it around into an opportunity to create.
When this situation's over, Boukas, you and I got to get together and we got to have a Utica club together.
Yeah. You might.
Would you rather die than drink a Utica club?
Well, when you start doing a medical podcast, we'll address that issue.
The Utica club. Okay, Boukas, thank you so much. By the way, before we go, in the comments, Stiebko says hi. He wants me to say that. Say something. What can you say in Croatian to him?
Oh, I'm very bad. I'm very bad. But I played with an amazing Croatian musician for 2.5 years that plays the crap out of the tambura, Philip Novosel. But no, man, thank you so much for this and for making these conversations possible, and have great success with this, because this is part of your arsenal. This is part of what your purpose is here. And
hopefully.
well, you're doing a lot of musicians and people interested in music a really great service at a time when we really need it bad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying my absolute best.
No, and that's the thing, man. Your intent is just personally and heartfelt, just as pure as the way you play and the way you think about music and the way you play music with people. You're the same person, as you are behind the drum kit.
I sure hope so.
No, you know what I mean? It's like this is a way of playing. This is a different way of blowing, right? By talking, but as extemporaneous as it is, you had some very specific things you wanted to talk about. So that was our form, and each subject was a chorus and a solo. So we just finished our solo, and hopefully there'll be more solos to come.
Well, Boukas, I appreciate it. To everyone who is listening, thank you so much. Thank you for a great intro 3 months of the podcast. We'll be back early next year. I don't have a full schedule yet, but I want to let you guys all know that January, let me look at my schedule. January 10th, we'll be having Don King, the director of Saturday Night Live, on the show. So that's going to be incredible. And I'm going to announce a whole schedule for all of January as soon as that's available. So thank you all for listening, and stay safe.
Wow. Wow.